Congratulations! If you're watching this video, you are the proud new owner of our machine, the Handi Quilter Moxie. What we're going to do in this video is walk you through how to get started. We're going to walk you through the frame, the setup, and loading your quilt so that you can get started quilting. So if your frame is set up to this point, we're ready to go. But if your frame is not yet set up, what I need you to do is go to your box and take out the manual, and it's going to give you instructions on a new app called BILT. And it'll walk you through step by step. It has really interactive things that will show you exactly which screw to use, but it'll walk you through how to put your frame together so it's at this point. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do at this point is to install the carriage. So we're going to get the carriage on there. Okay, right now I'm standing at the back of the frame, and I want to make sure that the stitch regulator is on the back of the frame. So I'm just going to put those black wheels right onto the black track. Make sure that you're checking that this regulator, the wheel is rolling along that track. Okay? The next step is just to put the machine onto the carriage. When I put the machine onto the carriage, I just set those black wheels right on that black track and slowly roll it forward. The stitch regulator on this side of the machine, when you're placing it on the machine, it's going to be in the up position. We need to push it so that it's down, so that that wheel will be rolling alongside it's rolling right on the metal track, not on the black one. Okay, so we have two encoder cables, and both of the ends are interchangeable. So the short one is going to go on the side track. We're going to push it into the back and give it a little extra push, and then we're going to push the small one right in here above it. And when you push it in, make sure you give it that extra push so that it's flush up against there. The longer cable, it is also interchangeable. This one that goes in the back of the machine, this one you need to be very careful of giving that extra push. And then the other cable goes on the stitch regulator right there. Hold on to that little screw and the machine. So we've got our encoders in place, and then we're going to take our power source and we're going to plug it in right here. All right, while we're here at the back of the machine, I want to point out the on and off button. The circle is off and the line would be on. So when we turn the machine on, we'll push it towards the straight line. So we are going to install the handlebars. It is included in the BILT app, but there's a couple things I just want to point out to you. So we are going to walk through that process here. The machine comes with this cover in place, so we just need to take the 3mm Allen wrench and loosen the screws. There's two screws back here. We're just going to loosen them, and then we just pop it up at the back and slide it backward. There's two little tabs on there. We don't want to do any damage to those, so make sure you slide it backwards. We'll set that to the side. And here's our handlebars. So I'm just going to set the screws, just kind of finger start them. Okay, and then I'll just take the Allen wrench and just tighten up those screws. Okay, now that we have the screws in place, it comes with two cables that we need to plug in, and one of them is labeled right. Make sure you find the one labeled right. And we are standing at the front of our machine, so we're putting it in the right connector. And then the one that doesn't have a label, we just put that in the left. Okay? And now we're just going to take our cover, slide it into the front, just set it down into place, use our 3mm Allen wrench and tighten those back up, and we're good to go. So the next thing we're going to do is to put the bars on the back of the frame that are kind of go in the throat of the machine. So I'm just going to slide this through the throat of the machine. And it's important that I put the end in first that does not have the gear in it. So I'm just going to come over here and push this button, slide the bar in, and then I can go back over to this side and put the bar in right there. Just lift the little lever, and that bar's in place, then we'll add the next one. Okay, just wanted to talk a little bit about leveling the frame with you. So with the Loft Frame, in the BILT instructions, there's a couple of options for leveling them. They talked about using a leveler, but the easiest one for me is just to use our machine. So if we just move the machine across our frame like this, and we let it sit, if it sits still, it's level in that spot. I'm gonna move it also over to the right. I also want to move it, bump the bar forward, and I also want to move it back and make sure that it's sitting in those places. If I move it over to the right here, and I let go of it, it drifts back towards the center. So what that's telling me is that I need to take the feet on that frame on the right side, and I need to lower those feet, or I could higher the feet on this end, but I'm gonna have to adjust the feet. And the reason I know that is because the machine doesn't sit still right there. It has a tendency to drift. So make sure that your frame is all level before we get quilting. Okay, let's get the machine threaded. So in the BILT, the BILT app, it talked about how to put the thread mast and the spool pin in place. So just to double check with you, make sure that the washer is underneath the nut. So the washer should be right next to the machine. So we're gonna put our thread on the spool pin, and I'm gonna bring it up, and I'm just gonna put it through the eye of the thread mast. Okay, and then we're gonna go up, and we're gonna thread it through the 3-hole thread guide from back to front, wrapping it around. I like to think of kind of like a whip stitch. So it's gotta go around that 3-hole thread guide. If I can hold on to my thread. From back to front in all 3 of those holes. Okay, then we're just gonna catch the thread in the thread guide right above the tension disc. Now I like to hold on to the thread with both fingers, and I like to thread it down into that, between those tension discs. Pull it straight down, and then I'm gonna pull it up in front and catch that spring. And when I pull on the thread now, I should be able to see that spring moving forward. I'll bring it underneath the stirrup. And then at the take-up lever, I've got to go from back to front again. And at the thread guide down here, I'm just gonna put it back and then forward through that thread guide. The collar keeps that hole right there, keeps the thread right in the front of the needle. And now we can thread it through the needle. And we're gonna go from front to back here. And if I can just find the groove in the needle, it'll slip right into the hole. Okay, there we go. All right, we're threaded. And now we're gonna talk about the bobbin case and the bobbin tension. So once we have a well-wound bobbin, we're going to bring it to our bobbin case and talk about setting a good tension in our bobbin. Inside the bobbin, we have a backlash spring. And that backlash spring is really important. It helps keep the thread from looping when we push stop on the machine, because it's moving so fast that when we push stop, it kind of has to be grabbed by that backlash spring, okay? So, and then here's our bobbin. When I'm looking at the bobbin, I want the thread to be wrapped around it clockwise so that the thread is hanging off that right side. And then I'm just going to set it inside the bobbin. And on the outside of it, we'll see this tension arm, this tension spring. And it's held into place by the small screw, and then the bigger screw is what loosens and tightens the tension of our bobbin case. All right, and then I'm gonna slide it under that tension spring, and this is how we check our bobbins. So I'm gonna set it in my hand with the bobbin up. So the open end of the case is up, and I'm going to hold onto the thread, and I want it to stand up in my hand. I want enough tension that it'll stand up. And now as I lift the thread, I want it to spin, but not leave my hand. That's right where we want the tension set. And then as we set it into the machine, we don't hold that lever open. We only use that lever when we're pulling the bobbin out, the bobbin case out of our machine. As we're putting it in, we just hold it like this, bring it to the machine, push on it until we hear the snap. And now our thread is ready to go. Okay, we're going to show you how to change the needle so that you feel good about changing the needle. We recommend that you change the needle with every big project that you're doing. So you need to get comfortable changing the needles. With our Handi Quilter machines, the needle system that you're going to be using is 134. So it should say on the package 134, and then you know that you have the right system of needles for your machine. So we choose the size of the needle dependent on the thread that we're using. And because I'm using a 40 weight thread right now, I'm going to get a size 110-18 needle. And then I'm going to take out the old one by using my 2.5 millimeter hex wrench, and I'm going to put it right there in the thumb screw. There's a little spot where your tool fits, and we're just going to loosen it a tiny bit, and if I loosen it, that needle will come right out. And then I need to set that needle aside so I know it's my used needle. The needle has a groove at the front of it. It has kind of a little scarf at the back of it, but the front of it has a groove, and that groove is there to help protect the thread as the machine is stitching. So we want to make sure that that groove is in the front. It has a round shank, so it doesn't have a specific, it'll slide right up in there. There's a little hole that you can see and make sure that it's all the way up in there. Then I use my old needle, double check that groove, slide my old needle in that groove, and then I use the needle to hold it in place while I use the thumb screw to tighten it back up. And I just tighten it with my fingers, and then I'm going to take the hex wrench, put it back in, and give it one more little tighten. And then my needle is ready to go. The next thing we're going to talk about is changing your feet. It has an easy access post so that we can easily change the foot out on this machine, and you can use all of the Handi Quilter feet that are available. So we're just going to use, once again, our 2.5 millimeter hex wrench. We're going to loosen that. This one we have to loosen quite a bit more than our needle. We're going to loosen it quite a bit until that foot falls off. We don't want to take the screw all the way out. We just want to loosen it. Then I like to bring the foot in from the back, slide it right in there, and then I'm going to hold it in place. I just like to hold my finger underneath it to keep it up there so that it's up high enough. We want to make sure that it's sitting right up against that post. Tighten it up and give it that extra little twist, and it's that simple to change your foot. We're almost ready to quilt. We're going to load our fabric now. So I have my backing fabric in my hand, and one thing you want to make sure of is that your backing fabric is at least 3 to 4 inches bigger all the way around, so that you have some extra fabric at the top, the bottom, and the sides. Okay, so on the app, it walked you through how to put your leaders in place, and it also talked about marking the center. So on the center of all 3 of my leaders, we have a mark with permanent marker right there. So I know where the center is. And my front 2 pulls, the center lines right up with my take-up pull right there. So all of those should be right in the center. So what I need to do is mark the center of my backing fabric. I'm going to fold it in half on the section that I'm going to pin to my leaders. And I like to just take some little snips, and I'll just snip a little tiny triangle right there. And remember, I have 3 or 4 extra inches of backing fabric, so it's not going to hurt if I have just a little 1/8 inch snip. And I'm going to mark that on my back and my front. If you don't want to snip your fabric, that's fine. You could just put a pin right there to mark your center. But somehow you want to mark where your center is. Okay, and then I'm going to put the right side of my backing, I'm going to lay it across the poles, and it's down towards the floor. So what I'm looking at is the wrong side of my backing fabric. And I'm going to lay it across there, and I bring it underneath that first pull towards the center. And I'm just going to hold it right on there for just a minute. Okay, and I'm going to find the center mark that I just marked. And I'm going to find the center mark on my leader. Got to scoot over here just a little bit. Okay, and I'm going to line up those 2 centers. And then I'm going to take my pins, and I really like these long arm quilting pins. You'll have a box of them with your kit. They're nice and long, and sharp, so it's easy to put through the leaders. And I'm putting it through the leader first and then the fabric, and I'm taking kind of one big bite out of the fabric. I'm not weaving it in and out, I'm just taking one big bite. And then I'm also putting my pins like head to toe, but I leave about a half an inch between so that you don't have too many pins. I really don't want the pins overlapping. So I'm just going to go from the center out all the way to the end in one direction, and then I'll go from the center to the other direction. This keeps my fabric smooth and straight as I'm pinning. So when I get to this last pin on the left side, I like to turn my pin the opposite direction and have it go from the outside towards the center. It's opposite of the rest of the pins, but as I smooth a little bit later, this keeps me from poking myself when I slide my hands across it. So just that one pin is going the other direction. And now I'm going to pin from the center out to the right. Okay, so now I've pinned all the way to the right side. So I'm just going to smooth this out across my backing. I like to just keep it taut back there because that helps as I'm rolling it up, advancing it on the pole. It helps to keep it nice and straight, and just that little bit of tension helps. So make sure that anytime you're advancing your fabric or rolling it on the poles that you have a ratchet lock in place so you can hear that I'm rolling it in the right direction. If you'll always have one of the ratchets locked into place, you can't go wrong. Okay, keep smoothing that out a little bit. And as I'm advancing, I'm going to start in the center, and I'm going to slide my hands out to the side, both directions. And as I'm advancing, I'm watching that the fabric will load up evenly right on top of each other on both the left and the right. So I can keep in my eye right there. Smoothing it out. And when it's about to, just let it drape down towards the floor. Now that we have our backing in place, we're going to load our top fabric. And it's hard for you to see because it's white, but I have a grid on one side so I can tell which way is up and which way is down. The right side of my fabric is going to be up, and the wrong side of my fabric will be down. I'm also marking the center. This time I'm marking with a pin because I don't really want to cut my quilt top, so I'm just going to use a little pin. I like to do the same with my quilt top. I lay it across that bar, and then I just set it right on top of that pole. All right, so I'm lining up the leader and the center mark on my leader with the center mark of my quilt top. And then I'm just going to take the pins. I also like to do leader side on this, but there's not a right and wrong. If it's easier for you to pin to the quilt top side, you can pin it that way. I'm just going to go from the leader side, the same technique with one big bite out of the pins, all the way from center to left, and then center to right. Once I have all the pins in place on my quilt top, I'm going to smooth it out across the back pole. I'm going to have the ratchet stop in place, and I'm going to advance it so that the top of my quilt is on this pole right here. Smoothing from the center out as I advance it. Also checking to make sure that it lines up on the sides as I advance it. That'll help you keep your quilt top nice and square. And I'm going to roll this all the way up on the pole. Right. Our last step in pinning is going to be to pin the backing of our quilt underneath here, and it's going to be pinned to the take-up pole, this pole right here. So we're going to pull this leader. If we just release the ratchet, and I'm going to let all of the leader out. So keep it nice and smooth, and make sure that you have it behind the leveling pole. If you marked the center of your leader and the center of your fabric, this part's really slick. We just have to put our center, the two centers together. I think you've heard this before. We're going to pin from center out. And this time, if you'll notice, I'm pinning to the fabric side instead of the leader side. These are all just personal choices. It's not going to make a difference in your quilting if you pin to the leader side or the fabric side. As long as your pins are like equal distance away from the edge of the leader or the fabric. So I like to use 1/4 of an inch because that's a number that we're all really familiar with, and I just try to keep them 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric. Now that I have my quilt backing pinned to the take-up leader, we're going to advance it a little bit. I make sure that your ratchet stop is in place, and we're going to advance this take-up pole until our pins are about 1 inch or 2 away from this leveling pole. And then I'm going to advance the front pole until it's nice and smooth. Okay, so there is our backing fabric. Now we're going to take our quilt top. I'm going to release the ratchet stop by lifting it up. And then I'm going to pull the quilt top out until it's about 2 inches below, 1 inch or 2 below the pins. You want to really make sure that you're not close enough to those pins that you might stitch onto the pins. So I just stop it so that it's about 1 inch or 2 below those, and that's where I like my quilt top to be. And then I'll put the ratchet stop back down. Okay, batting. We've got to get our batting in between, in the middle of our sandwich. So I'm going to take the batting, and I'm going to lay the batting out on top of the quilt top. I know it doesn't go there. We're just laying the quilt top right out. If I line it right up with my quilt top, and I smooth it out so it's nice and smooth. You don't want to do a lot of stretching and pulling on your batting, or you could make a hole in it or create a problem with it. So I lay it right there. Now here's the trick. I'm going to take the batting and I'm going to roll it up. I'm going to roll it like this and roll it right under that bar. I'm going to tuck it in. After loading lots of quilts and batting, this is the easiest way for me. Then I pull my quilt top forward and I just roll that batting out, and it's right where I need it. And then my quilt top can lay right on top of it. Okay, that gets you started. So when our machine is turned on, we're going to come to the home screen. And we know it's the home screen because it has the home in the upper left-hand corner. Right? To get to our main menu where we can make selections from, we're going to push the plus and the minus button together at the same time. All right, now I'm in the upper left-hand corner, it's a C. So if I want to change my mode of stitching, the C stands for cruising. So if I push the needle up-down button, it's going to select that, and it's going to let us choose from precision, cruise, or manual. So if I want to change that, I'm just going to push the minus or the plus button, either way, and it'll take me to different options. So if I go to cruise, which is the C, and I push the needle up-down button, that selects it. And now underneath it, I have a cruise speed that I can also change. So by pushing the minus or the plus, it will change the speed on the cruise. So when I get the one I like, I need to push the select button, which is the needle up, down. So I'm going to select that. Now, if there's something else I want to change, I'm going to go back to the main menu by pushing the minus and the plus together. And I want to go over to the next button, which is the arrows. So I'm going to push plus. And now I'm going to push needle up, down to select that. And what this screen does is it allows me to choose whether I want my needle to be in the up position or the down position when I push stop on the machine. And when I'm in the middle of stitching, I like it to be down. So I'm going to push the minus arrow. Now I'm going to push select, which will be needle up, down. And the next button to the right is our lighting. So I'm going to push a plus button, the needle up, down, and I can choose the lighting setting that I like. And when I have the lighting set like I like it, I'm going to push select, which is the needle up down, and that will leave the lighting on the setting that I like. So then if I push the plus button again, I'm going to go down to the one that looks like a clock, push select, which is our needle up down, and this is my overspeed alarm. So if I'm stitching faster than the stitch regulator, it's going to beep at me. So I can turn that on or off. Right now it's selected off. So if I want it on, just push the plus or minus button, and select, once again, is the needle up down button. Okay, the next button will select, and this is our stitch count. It will keep track of stitches in a single project, which is the first number, or it'll keep track of lifetime stitches. Right now it's just set at 1, but your machine will keep track of your stitches or your lifetime stitch count. Back to select with our needle up down. The next button is a diagnostics tool. You'll use that button if you ever have any issues with your machine. You can talk with technical support and they'll walk you through this diagnostic tool. It's not something that we need to work on today. The next button, I'm going to push select. This is where it allows you to put updates to your screen or to your machine. So if there are updates available to the Moxie, you would put the USB stick in and push this screen, and then that would allow you to do the updates. So select, and then the next button is the I, the information. I keep repeating that select is the needle up down button so that you can get comfortable with that. And this is the information where you can find, this is where you will find your software version for your machine. And then the last button there, if I select it, that also takes me to my home screen. So the machine is very intuitive. Once you learn that the needle up down button is select and the plus and minus buttons together take you to your main menu, you can maneuver right through that display. So we're just about ready to stitch. On each side of our frame, we have a clamp, and it's on a bungee cord. And it goes through the slot right on the side of the machine, either of the slots. You have 2 long slots. And before we get started quilting, we like to put these clamps on the sides of our quilt. I personally put them on the backing and the batting. It's definitely not holding my quilt top. It's just on the backing and the batting. And then on the other side of the slot, I have a little bungee lock or stop. And I can just push that button, and I push right up until it meets the side arm. The tricky part about the side clamps is I don't want them so tight that they're stretching the shape of the fabric. They're just to be taut and to hold the backing and batting fabric out smooth. So I'm going to put those on both sides of the quilt. Making sure that they're not too tight. And now we are ready to get started basting. So we just need to turn on the machine. Remember, on the on and off button, the circle is off and the straight line is on. Okay? We talked about the display and how to change the choices on the display. Right now, I have it set at 12 stitches per inch, and I just want to baste across my machine, or baste across my quilt. So I want to move that number down. I'm going to push the minus button on the left handlebar, and that's going to take my stitches per inch. I can take it all the way down to 4. So that's like a 1/4 inch stitch, and that's a great place to be for your basting stitch. So I want to first off baste across just my batting and my backing, and then that gives me a nice straight line that I can line my quilt top up to. So I'm going to put the needle down right where my quilt top is lined up, and then I'm going to walk around to the back of the machine, and I'm going to put the channel lock in place. The channel lock is this little C clamp, and it has 2 little rubber ends on the sides, and that helps hold it in place. So we're going to walk around here. And to get a line that goes straight across, horizontally across my quilt, I need to lock the wheels that allow it to move vertically. And the wheels that allow it to move vertically are on the machine, sitting on the carriage. So I need to be able to put this channel lock around the wheel and make sure that it touches both sides of the track. If it's touching both sides of the track, I know I have it in place. So once I have that plumb line in place, I'm going to pull my top fabric up to that line, and I'm going to give myself plenty of slack so that I can just pull it right up to that line. And then I do like to use a couple of pins, and I put them in vertically about 3 or 4 inches away from where I'm going to stitch. I want to make sure that I'm not going to hit these pins, and they're just holding the fabric in place so that I can baste this quilt top. So I still have the channel lock in place. I nudged it just an inch or two forward because I want this basting stitch to be within 1/4 of an inch. I want it to be less than 1/4 of an inch so that I don't have to take it out. It's just going to be hidden right in my binding. Needle down, needle up, pull up my bobbin thread. I still have my machine set at 4 stitches per inch, and I can just do a nice basting stitch right across the top. I can use my hands along here. If I have a little bit that I need to ease in, just holding my hands either in front of my machine or in back of it helps to ease in that little bit of fabric. I'll stitch all the way over to the side. To be able to stitch vertically down the sides, I need to switch the channel lock so that it locks the wheels in place that won't allow the machine to move left and right. It only allows the machine to move forward and back. And the wheels that allow the machine to move left to right are actually on the carriage that are sitting on the frame. So it's in a different place. So I'll show you where that's at. Before I put the channel lock on to stitch vertically, I want to make sure that my needle is down in place. So I have the machine right where I need it to start stitching. So I'll walk around to the back, and the wheel I need to put it on now is underneath the carriage. So I'm going to wrap it around that wheel and make sure that my channel lock touches both sides of the track. Okay. I'm going to do that on both sides of my quilt, down the left side and the right side. This will help me to keep the quilt square as I advance it each time. Every time I advance it, I'll do the basting stitch down that section of my throat space. I don't baste the entire quilt to start with. I baste across the top, down the sides of my throat space, and then when I advance, I do the next part of the throat space. We're going to talk about setting the tension, the upper tension on your machine. So if you remember, I had you put pins in to baste, and I want to make sure that I say take them out. We want these pins off the quilt. So, and then how tight do we actually set the tension of our quilt? That's really important. You might feel like you want it really tight, but your machine actually likes it to be just a little bit looser. So I try to make it tight, and then I go over to the take-up pull, to the ratchet on the take-up pull, and then I'll just release that 1 or 2 notches. So I should be able to put my finger underneath the quilt, and if I grab my finger, I should be able to grab it down to that first knuckle. So that means that it's tight enough yet loose enough to be able to form a good stitch. Okay, so I have on the side of my quilt, if you remember, you have 3 or 4 extra inches of backing right here and batting. So I have got a piece of fabric that is very similar. It's actually the same, but you just need a piece of fabric that's similar. And we're going to just, over to the side, we're going to do some practice stitching and just see how our tension looks before we put it on our quilt. Okay, so I brought my bobbin thread up, and I'm just going to stitch across. I just like to stitch this little piece of fabric down because I'm going to use it repeatedly as I change my bobbin. I'm going to check it. If you'll notice, I still have it set at 4 stitches per inch. 4 stitches per inch, and I want it to be at 10. So I'm just going to push on my right handlebar, the plus button, until my screen says that it's 10 stitches per inch. That's a good place to be checking your tension. Whenever I'm checking my tension, I like to do a couple of circles. And I like to do some points, because if I have bad tension, those are the places that it will show. So I do a couple of loops and a couple of points, and then because I'm on the edge of my fabric, I can just peek underneath here and see what my tension looks like underneath there. So if I had upper tension that was showing on the bottom, so I already set my bobbin tension correctly, I don't have to worry about my bobbin. But if I can see my upper thread underneath the quilt, that means that my top thread is not doing its job of pulling the bobbin thread up into the middle of the quilt. So I would need to tighten the upper tension. My tension's set pretty good, but if I were going to tighten it, I would put my thumb on the tension knob and turn it until my thumb was at the top. So my thumb's at the bottom, I turn it till it's at the top. That way, I know that I turned the tension dial at least a half of a turn, a half a rotation. I don't want to just randomly start turning that knob. I want to turn it either a quarter of a turn or a half a turn. So if I were looking at my stitches and they just were like a straight line across there that you couldn't see nice formed stitches, that means that my top tension is working too hard. It's not allowing the stitch to settle down in between the quilt, like in the batting. So that means I would need to loosen my upper tension so that I could let that thread settle down in the middle. But if you'll just keep in mind that the top thread, its job is to go down and pick up that bobbin thread and bring it up and let it settle in the middle, then you can just think about what the top thread needs to do to be able to make that nice stitch. It's finally time to quilt. All right, included with your Moxie, you received a kit that's How-to-Quilt Kit. Everything in this kit will help you get started quilting. So we're gonna go over what came in this quilt with this kit. You should have received instructions. And in here, they gave us some great ideas of how to start stitching. But before that, we received 1 yard of gridded fabric, and we've already loaded that on our frame. We received a package of long arm quilting pins. That's what we use to pin it to our leaders. We received several spools of thread, different types of thread, so that you can decide which kind of thread you like. And then we also received a channel lock. And that's what we used to get our perfectly straight lines vertically and horizontally across our quilt. So we also have in here Superior Thread Guide, a Threadology, a Thread Therapy lesson from Bob at Superior Threads. If you want to learn all about threads, that's an awesome tool. You just can watch that and it'll help you learn what you need to know about long arm quilting threads. So that's all we need to get started with our machine is fabric and a few threads, and we're ready to go. In your Getting Started packet, there's also little instructions on some quilting designs, just perfect places to get started with your quilting. And I'm going to go over them with you here as well. The first one, it's E's and L's. And you all know how to do E's and L's. We've been doing them since we were little kids. We just are going to do cursive E's and L's. And this gridded fabric is perfect for that because it helps us learn how to space them evenly. So because they're like 2-inch grids, I'm going to do an E and an L in that space. Okay, I'm going to show you how to get started by pulling up your bobbin thread. So I'm going to hold on to the upper thread with my left hand, and I'm going to use my right hand over on this left handlebar. I'm going to go needle down and needle up. And as I move the machine away, it will pull up that bobbin thread, and I can just grab a hold of that thread. So now I'm going to hold on to the top and the bobbin thread. And then I'm going to put my thumb on that needle up down button, and I'm going to do 4 or 5 little micro stitches. I'm just going to make sure that I have a nice little lock of my thread. And I don't want it to be a knot. I don't want to see something obvious. I just want to lock that thread in place. And now I can let go of those threads, and I'm ready to start stitching. I'm going to bring my machine down here, and I'm going to do an E in the middle section, and I'm going to do an L on the marked line. E in the middle, and L on the marked line. This grid fabric is so nice. And I can do them wide, or I can do them thin, whichever you choose. Our quilting is kind of like our handwriting. So yours won't look just like mine, and mine won't look just like yours, and it's okay. So practice your E's and L's on this grid fabric. It's a perfect way to help you learn that spacing. Our next design is called stippling. And some people refer to it as meandering. We're just going to call it stippling here. And it's just a nice filler design. It just looks like a puzzle, like your puzzle pieces. It just goes in and out. And this is a great design to help you learn how to fill space on your fabric. So when I started quilting, I did this all over my quilts. If this is what you enjoy doing, it's a perfect way to finish your quilts. So I'm just going to weave in and out, up and down. One of the things I like to think about when I'm doing a stipple is I like to have a shape or a size in mind. So I think of a circle, but I try to think of like a quarter or a nickel or a dime, and then I'm meandering around that size. And that helps me keep consistent from the top to the bottom of either my quilting space or my whole quilt. So think of that. And then another tip is to kind of, if you fill on a diagonal, it helps to fill that space and it keeps it from not looking really linear. So one of the things that we like to talk about when we're teaching quilting is to learn a design and stitch that design until you learn it really well, and then add something new. So once you've practiced the stippling design and you're pretty confident with your stipple, here's my challenge. Try something new. Add a star or a heart or something like that in with your stipple. So I'm going to show you how that works. One thing to think about when you're trying to stitch a star is that if I want to have a nice point on the end of my star, I need to make sure that I pause my hands so that I can have a point. If I just run it around that point, it makes it kind of like a curve instead of a point. So here we go, we're going to try a star. Okay, I'm going to go up to that point, pause my hands, down and pause, left pause, right pause, and then finish up that star. And then I can go back into a stipple. Another star, pause, pause. Make sure you pause and get those points. Once you're confident with the star, that's where we're going to try and add a heart. And I go down to the center of the hearts and around the left side and up around the right side. There is, of course, more than one way to stitch a heart, but you can change the direction and just keep stitching. So give that a go. I think you're going to have fun driving this machine. The last quilting design we're going to go over is called the continuous line curve. And it's drawn out on a diagram for you, and I'm just going to show you briefly how to stitch it out. It's just a nice curve. You just have to think of the shape of an arc in your mind. So I'm going to we're going to get started. I'm going to put my needle down in the first corner and bring up my bobbin thread. And then I'm going to stitch an arc to the next point on my grid. So it really is helpful if I am looking at the point that I'm headed to. So I'm going to start stitching at 10 stitches per inch. I'm going to keep my eye on point B. I'm going to do an arc all the way across. We're just going to go across 4. And then I'm going to come down that right side with an arc. And then I'm going to go back across towards the left. I'm going to stop here. And what I need to make sure that I'm doing is filling in the vertical grid. So from this point, I'm going to go straight up and then back down. Now I'm going to go back across to the left, straight up to fill in that vertical grid, and back down, across to the left, up, down, across to the left. And now what I'm going to do is stitch just an arc all the way across the top like I did on the first row. And I'm looking at the point that I'm headed to. Back down, across. We'll do just a couple more. And if you're watching that point that you're headed to, it's okay if it's not perfect. It gives you a nice, fun grid. So once you've learned this pathway, you can do all kinds of designs. So you just have to learn how to go across and fill in those vertical spots as you go back across so that you don't leave those spots open. And this pathway is going to come in handy to you for years and years to come. Before we advance our quilt, I want to show you how to do a tie-off stitch. So once we've finished quilting over to the side, I like to do the same as when we started. We're going to do little micro stitches. So I'm going to hold the needle down, the half stitch button, the needle up, the needle down, and I'm just going to take 4 or 5 little stitches, and that will lock it in place, okay? And then I'm going to loosen my thread, and I like to loosen it. If I just move the machine away right now, I'm going to pull on those stitches. So I loosen it right underneath that curly thread guide, move it away. Then I'm going to grab hold with my left hand. I'm going to grab that upper thread, and then I'm going to take the machine, whoops, hold on to the thread, don't let go. I'm going to take it back to that last stitch I did and go needle down, needle up. While I'm still holding onto the thread, I'm going to move the machine away. And as I move it away the second time, I'm going to move it at least 6 inches. And then I can cut my thread, and what I'm cutting is 1 upper thread and then 2 pieces of bobbin thread because it made a loop. So make sure that you're cutting that bobbin thread so that you don't drag your bobbin thread across the back of your quilt, or you'll kind of have a mess and it could get tangled in your wheels. So make sure that your threads are cut. Okay, so to advance our quilt, once we've finished to the edge, I'm going to take off the side clamps, set those to the side. I'm going to come over to this right side and I'm going to release the ratchet stops. So I'm going to lift those up, and if I roll the pole the way it wants to go, they easily lift. So that one wants to go to the inside, so I'll just lift it up. They can stay in place right there. And with the ratchet stop on the take-up pole still in place, I'm going to advance my quilt, making sure my batting is nice and smooth. And I want to advance it just enough that I can still see my last row of stitching, because I may be even nesting those designs together. So make sure that you don't advance it further than you want to stitch. And then I'm going to put the ratchet stops back in place. I'm going to tighten those up. I'm going to go to the take-up pull and loosen it 1 or 2 notches so that I have a nice tension with my quilt sandwich. I'm going to put my clamps back on the batting and the backing. And now I'm ready to baste vertically down the left and right side again before I start quilting the next section of my quilt. We're just going to go over the machine maintenance and oiling. So it's recommended that you oil the bobbin case area with every new bobbin that you put in place. So, and because they put a ballast behind the bobbin case area, you are allowed to use canned air on this machine. There are a couple of tips with canned air that you need to know if you choose to use it. Canned air should not be shook. How many of you pick it up and want to shake it like a paint can? We don't shake it. The first thing we do is give it a little squirt and just to let out any humidity that might be at the top of this can. So just give it a little squirt. And then when we use it underneath, we do not want to tip it upside down. We don't want to shake it. We just want to hold it straight up and down. And we're just going to do short little bursts of air. And because of the way they have built this bobbin case area, that lint is not blowing back into the working parts of the machine. It's just going to blow out of the way. So then we also, with our machine, got a bottle of machine oil. It's light machine oil. And we're going to take this and we're going to extend this. And once we've extended it, we want to make sure that we leave it up that way. If you push it down into your bottle, it will leak. and also can take dust and things that you don't want down in your oil down into the oil. So once you've pulled out that nozzle, just leave it out. And we're going to use this nozzle down underneath here. We're going to put it right in the race, right on the lip, right? And we're going to squirt one little drop of oil. And we should be able to see the drop of oil, but we should also make sure that we didn't put so much that it's dripping off of that little ledge. So one drop of oil, clean out that bobbin case area every time you put a new bobbin case or a new bobbin in your case. There are several optional accessories that are available to go with your Moxie. So I'm going to show you about the Steady Fit ruler base and how to install that on your Moxie. So the Moxie comes with, or when you buy the Steady Fit ruler base, you get the ruler base, and then you will also get 4 knobs with the appropriate screws to put those in place. So we're going to go over to the side of the machine and show you where they go. It takes a 4mm hex wrench. The places are already ready for you to put the screws in. We just use that hex wrench to put those knobs right in place. I'll tighten that up just a little bit, and then I'll put the 2 on the other side. And on the side of the ruler base, there's notches, and we just need to use those to fit on the knob. So we're just going to set this so that it's over the first knob. We only have about an inch gap between the ruler base and the front of the machine, and then I just push it back, and gently it slides right into place, and the ruler base is ready to go. So another optional accessory for the Moxie would be the horizontal spool pin. So if you have spools of thread in your stash that are straight wound, which means they're not cross wound, thread delivery can be an important factor in how to use that thread. So I would take off my spool of thread, and I have that spool pin already in place. So I'm going to set the clamp of the horizontal spool pin on, and then I'm just going to tighten it. If you'll look closely at it, I like that the thumb screw is to the back of the post, so that when I slide the spool of thread in place, it's not bumping on that thumb screw. So we want to make sure that it's towards the back, and then it'll give you a clear path, your thread a clear path. It won't hang up on that spool pin. Once I have the spool of thread in place, I can take the old thread that's already threaded and just tie a knot. It's not a square knot, it's just a regular knot around my fingers. Make sure we don't have any hang-ups there. Put it through the eye of the thread mast, and then I'm just going to come to the front of my machine, and I'm going to pull on the thread right here. And I can pull that thread all the way through so that I don't have to rethread every time. Let me just raise this. The trick is, when you do that, what I want you to do is come here to your tension discs and pull on these threads and make sure that that thread that you just pulled through is still flossed really tightly between those 2 discs. And then you're ready for your next thread. Well, I think we've covered it. We've gone over all of the things that we need for you to be able to get started quilting with your Moxie. If you're looking for more education, we have hours and hours of video on teaching you how to use different types of tools or use different techniques. So we would love to see you having fun with your Moxie. So share with us some of the things that you're quilting, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to find a lot of videos that will help you in your quilting path ahead. We didn't go over a lot of rules, but I'm going to leave you with one today, and that's to have some fun quilting.